Go ahead and get started. Just to let folks know as well, we are recording this so that we can post it out for those folks that maybe miss the presentation, so that way we can make sure we get as many people informed and talking about these solutions and technologies as possible. So again, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. My name is Don Penland. I'm a partner at Netrix, LLC. I'm also a practice director, and essentially I'm responsible for both our Microsoft practice and our online services practice. I'm joined today with Joni Boone from Microsoft. She's an innovation specialist for the Azure stack of solutions from Microsoft. Joni, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Don. Yes, welcome. I'm happy to have joined today.
Thank you. So we're very happy to get these webinar series of sessions going. We'll talk a little bit about what we're looking to accomplish today. So to start off with, Joni's going to help us out and do an overview of Microsoft Windows Azure. There seems to still be a lot of confusion in the marketplace related to the solutions and the possibilities with the platform, so we want to make sure that we educate you guys through that. Then I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over a customer case study for Netrix that we were and are continuing to work with currently today. We felt that one of the best ways to get ideas flowing and thinking through this type of solution set, especially if it's new to some folks, is to really talk about customer examples. How are customers using these solutions? How are customers using the technology to change their business or to improve their business and to expand their business? So we felt that that's a great way to help people understand it and use examples and those type of things. And then we'll also open it up for question and answers at the very end. So this is part of a webinar series. We're trying something maybe a little bit different here. We felt that this is such a large topic, and the ability to be able to deep dive into the solutions and the different technologies would be really hard to do on a 50-minute call, right? So what we're looking to do is actually break this up over the next few months. And essentially today's session is to give you a high-level overview of what the solution is. Talk again about a customer reference, a case study where we can kind of show you how that customer approached really from the beginning, what their roadmap was, the different technologies that they're deploying, leveraging online services, cloud services, and those type of things. And essentially what we've decided to do is, as we have done the deployment for the customer through a roadmap perspective, we thought we'd follow a very similar model for the webinar series. So what we're excited about doing is each month we will present a deep dive topic on a particular solution area at the time that the customer had deployed that on their roadmap, right? So we'll kind of leverage this customer case study throughout the process of these over the next couple of months, and when the customer deploys a particular part of the solution set, then we will do a webinar series and talk about that. What are the lessons learned? What were some of the reasons why the customer chose to do this, and some of those pieces. We have chosen to keep the customer's name anonymous at this time because of some of the different aspects of what they're doing and the deployment. So we will be talking somewhat generically about some of the things that they're accomplishing, but a lot of the same principles and business aspects will still add value to things that you're looking at within your environment as well. So as you can see here, we've got a pretty good outbreak of different solutions: infrastructure as a service, cloud, and integrated storage, leveraging infrastructure as a service for SharePoint and SQL, application as a service, and then business intelligence and managing big data. So each month, again, we'll have a pretty good breakdown of each one of these. As we continue forward here, I think most of the folks on the call are familiar with Netrix, but maybe for some of those that are not, Netrix is a full IT consulting firm. We essentially are a Microsoft Gold partner, Cisco partner as well, and we are able to provide really what I call from an online services perspective, be an online broker for a customer, both for selecting the solution and then for doing the deployment and the delivery of the solution and working that with our customers. And what I mean by the online broker is the ability for us to work with the customer and understand their business, understand how they're looking to deploy some of these solutions, and then give them recommendations, consult them on where they should maybe leverage different solutions for what those business challenges are. So some of those may include keeping some of those technology solutions on-premise. Some of those may include leveraging public cloud solutions like we're talking about today. Some of those may be using public cloud solutions to create your own private cloud, right? And some of those may be still leveraging things like dedicated managed services data centers for some of those applications as well. So what we really like to do is take a consultative approach with our clients, understand their business needs, and then provide them a solution that maybe has a mixture of all of those, a hybrid solution, some of those types of pieces. So you'll see that when we talk about the customer case study of how we worked with this particular customer to kind of divide that up. So, one of the key themes that we'd like you to take away from this is it's not an all or nothing type conversation, right? So some folks kind of put up a roadblock or a wall related to online services initially because they feel that maybe they have to move all their services into those type of consumptions, and that's just not the case, right? So we would definitely work with the different folks, and one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar series again is to educate folks on what their different options may be, how they can leverage these solutions, and again how they can consume them as it makes sense. The last point I want to make as well is Netrix has gone through a lot of growth over the last year or two. So those that are on the phone that have been with us for a long time, you've probably experienced that growth, and we're very excited about that growth. And as of this last month, we've actually grown to 6 national offices as an organization. So I think a lot of folks look at us as just still an Illinois firm, and that's just not the case. We've actually grown a lot in the South Central area, Houston and Dallas office, and then various other offices in the Central region. So we're very proud of that accomplishment as well. So again, just to give you a little bit of a background about Netrix. Sample client list, just we'll pop this up for a second, but again, Netrix is comfortable working in both mid-market, small, and enterprise customers, so we really have been able to kind of bridge the gap between a lot of those different pieces. So when we think about online services, we hear some different themes from our customers about what they're looking for, and we've been able to kind of collate those to some very central themes from the customers. One of those is that customers are looking to provide a collaborative solutions to allow their organization, both within the organization and by extending that out to their business partners, to really promote growth and create new innovative ideas, services, or product lines. So really any of our customers that are in a business, whether they're providing some type of service, professional service, those pieces, or they're making a widget, right? There's some key themes around what they're looking to do with that. How do I work with business partners? How do I do those types of things? Obviously, once we figure out some of those services, the next piece is that we hear a lot from customers is how do I provide a method to market and sell that out to different customer bases and those types. So again, when we talk about these online services, one of the things we're trying to do is really enable the business. We want to make sure that IT is not a barrier to the success of the growth of the business, whether that business is taking a national spurt, right, similar to Netrix where we're growing and opening up offices. So how can we leverage some of these solutions to allow that to happen? One of the things we use online services for a lot is merger and acquisition activity. How can we very quickly integrate that acquisition or that merger together, leveraging similar messaging platforms? How can we leverage things like Windows Azure that we're talking about today to consolidate application servers and things like that? So those are some of the things that we're hearing from our customers and what they're demanding from their IT group. And I was recently in a meeting with a customer, and I thought this was a very good quote. The CIO said to me, the one reason why I'm looking to move to Windows Azure is because I'm in the business to create, and I'm not in the business to create and run an IT organization or a data center. So some of his challenges were related to constantly thinking about facilities related to his data center and the data centers at his branch locations and those type of places. Constantly worried about what was the staffing of his IT organization, training for the IT organization, some of those types of things. So we're hearing that more and more. For example, even when McDonald's originally moved into Office 365, the CIO there said, I'm in the business to make hamburgers, not to run an IT organization. So we're seeing that as a common thread or a common theme from a lot of our customers. So I'm hoping that a lot of folks are feeling the same way, and these are some of the challenges that you're running into, and that this presentation and this webinar series will provide you some different ways to look at this, some different kind of case studies and examples of how different folks are using it. So from there, I'm going to hand it over to Joni and have her do the overview, and then I'll be back in a few minutes. Joni, we're able to see your desktop. If you just want to open up PowerPoint there you go.
For a little over 10 years, and it has been a wonderful experience. And through that, we've seen a lot of growth and change within the organization. And over the last year specifically, we've been on a journey within Microsoft to really change our organization from being just a typical software company to a devices and services organization. And when we look at that, we're doing that, and how we're developing that strategy is really looking at these IT trends that we've seen out in the world today. They really focus on these big mega trends that we're seeing. The mobility, first and foremost, we all know as the world has changed over the last years, everyone is mobile. Most people don't go to an office every day. I work 50% of the time, out of a Starbucks. So everyone wants to be mobile. Cloud, which we're going to talk about a lot today, being mobile means you need to have access to that data anywhere, anytime. Social, how are we changing the way we're communicating not only internally with our organization with things such as Yammer, but how are we also using social networking? How are we using LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter? How are we doing all of that to involve our own organizations? And then lastly, it's big data. So big data isn't anything necessarily new, but what we've actually done with big data and how we've allowed big data to be presented to an organization and presented within the organization so that it's now usable and feasible, and customers are actually within the organization are seeing benefits of the big data. So we're really not only embracing the future of computing, but we're also building our solutions on top of these trends that we're seeing today within the organizations. Now, when we talk about Windows Azure, when we think about it, really an easy way of looking at it is Microsoft's cloud platform that allows customers to build, host, and scale out data and or applications within our data center. So a real easy way of kind of just thinking through that point. The top 6 boxes on the left talk through the reasons why customers start looking at utilizing Windows Azure. First and foremost, it is usage-based. So you do pay for what you use. We're down to a compute charge by a minute. If you think through in situations where I may only need to spin up virtual machines, especially in a dev and test environment, for a couple hours, you're actually only charged by the minute of when you're using that. It's fully automated. You're using our managed resources, so you're taking advantage of Microsoft's ability and our global data centers that we have and the compute power that we've built into those data centers. It's always up, always on, 365 days a year, 24/7 support. Azure is very elastic. It grows with your organization. We have organizations that run websites and have grown their websites through Azure. We have organizations who have said, okay, I'm just going to use Azure to build a new solution for my organization, and when I'm done with that solution and I have it fully running, and maybe it's running now in production, it's not on Azure but on premise, I'm going to spin that Azure back down. So it's very elastic. Customers can dip their toe in the water, or they can actually go full force into Azure and allow it to grow as their organization grows. And then the economics behind it. I have yet to have a customer tell me that looking at cloud solutions and moving their data into the cloud is more expensive than running it on-premise. You probably heard many of us at Azure, or many of us at Microsoft, we talk about the cloud on your terms. So when we talk about the cloud, we take a look at your private cloud, which is, again, your infrastructure that you're running internally, and then also the public cloud, which we call Azure. We allow you to have the ability to have that hybrid cloud if you need or want it. So you can spin up things on your private cloud, move it, and then move it back down very seamlessly. And when I talk about cloud services and we look at that taxonomy of cloud, when we look at on the second column is your on-premise servers. That's typical IT. That's usually the way organizations have run their businesses in the past. They're responsible for the networking layer all the way up through the application layer. Now, we can take a look at the far right, where software as a service. So that is our Office 365 or CRM Online offering. Right in the middle is the two places where Azure fits. We can look at infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. When you take a thought process around really what does that mean for the organization, when you think about infrastructure as a service, it's you're spinning up your VMs within Microsoft Data Center. So we are responsible for the physical layer, attaching and managing that physical layer. Your organization is still responsible for that virtual layer of that environment. The second piece is the platform as a service. That's where Microsoft now is going to be responsible for that virtual layer as well. Your organization is really just responsible for that application that is hosted and running within Windows Azure. So as you can see down the spectrum of moving more towards the software as a service with platform and software as a service, you're going to gain much more efficiencies and much more cost savings. We allow organizations, we're the only company out there that's really got an offering in every single one of these silos. So we can allow you to start with on-premise, take your on-premise servers that you have today. You can now look at spinning them up within the infrastructure as a service. You can also look at using websites or using some of our multi-factor authentication services and running them as a true platform as a service, or you could go all the way full force with Office 365. But you can move back and forth very seamlessly because it's the same technology wherever you're at within this continuum. So it's nice to see that as you kind of grow, as your organization is growing and as you're looking to change your organization and follow the trends that are going on today, you can start to look at where do I want to test myself into Azure, or do I want to look at Microsoft and going fully with Office 365? Today, Microsoft has 8 global data centers that support Azure. We have 4 here in the U.S., we have 2 in Asia Pacific, and we have 2 in Europe. We have announced that there is 2 more opening up in 2014 in Japan and 2 more in Australia. We have also fully announced as well that we are opening data centers as well in Brazil. So we are going to have, in theory, many more data centers that are running Azure on a global basis today. We do have a global CDN around the world that if you would need to cache your data maybe closer to your locations as well, you can take advantage of our global CDN. As I said before, Azure is 24/7, 365 days a year. Our data centers host over 1 billion customers and 20 million businesses. We are in 76 markets worldwide. And when you think of the experience of all the folks working within our data center, it's 280 years of combined industry experience. Pretty amazing. And then again, if your organization needs to do anything in local currency within Azure, we're up to, I think it's 19 different currencies now that we support as well. So very, very much can take advantage of where your organization sits today, whether it's here in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. So when we look at Windows Azure, one of the key things that I always talk through is it's not an either-or situation. It's an and situation. We talked a little bit about that hybrid cloud. So whether you want to do something on-premise or do it in the cloud, that integration is there because we're using the one consistent same platform, whether it's on-premise within Microsoft's Azure cloud or your service provider. So from a virtualization layer, that would be Hyper-V. So everything that's running in Windows Azure is Hyper-V. When we take a look at identity, that's Active Directory. You can look at running Active Directory in Windows Azure or having Active Directory running on-premise. From a development as well, I'll talk through that on the next slide, but from a development standpoint, it is all .NET, or you can also look at using other platforms like Java, PHP within that. From a management perspective, you're also looking at running this through System Center. So System Center is going to be the management tool that you're using on-premise. You can also manage that within the Azure cloud or through your service provider. And the data platform as well, we're expanding that, whether you're running maybe SQL, if you're running Oracle on-premise, all of that can be run in Azure today. So to really think through, it's not either-or situation. You don't need to look at changing your technology. You're expanding your technology and you're extending your data center out into Azure. Most organizations may not be completely 100% Microsoft. So you probably maybe have some developers who would be happier working in Java than .NET. That's fine as well. You can look at running any of your organizations. If your developers are happier in Java, they can still port all of that into Azure as well. When you're looking at devices, if you're looking at doing mobile applications, like I have T-Mobile as my provider. And when I go out to look at my account, I go to the app and I open up the app. That app is actually running within Windows Azure, and that data is actually housed in Windows Azure. So whether or not you have Android, iOS, or even Windows phones, all of that can be natively supported while the application, the development is going on within Windows Azure. From a database perspective, we do support SQL Server as well as Hadoop. We have now as well have an agreement with Oracle. So Oracle databases running on Windows or Linux are also supported within Windows Azure. From an operating system perspective, it doesn't necessarily just have to be Windows. It can be Linux as well. So as well, if your organization isn't strictly Microsoft, that's okay too. The cloud does support that. And we understand that we don't want to be just tied to Microsoft. We understand that we have to be very open and flexible. And lastly, the next thing that always comes up when we start talking about cloud is security. Microsoft is very transparent about security and what we have done. So there is, on the windowsazure.com website, there is an area called the Trust Center. That Trust Center is probably the first point to which anyone will go look at when it comes to, that I recommend looking at when it comes to security and understanding where does Microsoft, how do we hire, how do we fire, what are the things that we need to do, where are our certifications, where can I request an attestation for that, looking through the yearly audits, they're all independently verified. Our SLAs are out there. So we have 99.9% SLAs and then 99.95 on the virtual machines themselves. Those are monthly SLAs. That's pretty unique in the industry today. Those are monthly SLAs. Those are not yearly. We usually run above those SLAs, but if not, they are financially backed as well. So again, there's also a real-time status dashboard out on the windowsazure.com website that you as an organization go out there and see exactly what's happening within any of the data centers and with any of the services. So from a security perspective, all of that information is readily available. As we continue to enhance our security measures, we will always put that out there. So as we continue to gain different certifications, we have many today. As we gain more and more, those go out there as well. So all of that is very transparent. So when you're being asked about the security behind it, all of that information is available from Microsoft. So this really kind of just looks at how overall we have the integration. It's and, it's not or. We're very open and flexible, and we have the security. The three things that organizations have asked for in order to feel comfortable moving applications or moving their data into Azure, we've met those and we've designed Azure to ensure whether it's Azure, Office 365, CRM Online, all of those features when you look at the cloud, all of that's been designed that way on purpose. So this is really, when I look at this slide, this is the building blocks of Windows Azure. So as I'm talking to organizations, really I look at these three layers. The bottom layer is kind of the easy layer. That's the infrastructure layer. So that's really your virtual machines running in your own virtual network, connected today through a VPN. And that's really extending your data center into our data center. So that's kind of the easy layer. The next layer is going to be the data services layer, and that's the storage layer. And we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail in terms of storage and what storage all has. And then the top layer is the application layer. I kind of think that's the fun layer. That's the layer where all your applications can run and all the new exciting things that you can do. So again, mobile services. I talked about T-Mobile, looking at how you might want to extend your mobile application out to those end users. Thinking about, rather than having to build that on-premise solution, let's look at building it in Azure. Websites. Websites is very, very common for customers. Creating new websites, having to do any marketing campaigns, having to do any spinning up any new sites that you may have. If you're doing any bringing in other organizations from an M&A activity, how do I bring that all over? Websites is a great way of utilizing that's fully supported within Azure. Doing any full-end analytics, what we call HD Insights. Azure Media Services is, again, something that organizations have been asking about. Where can I possibly kind of have my own internal YouTube going on without having to build that infrastructure? Especially as a global organization, I don't want to have my users who may be in Australia having to come back here to the U.S. to view a video. I don't want them to have to pull that across the wire. Why not use Azure Media Services for something like that? So this is where I kind of think the exciting piece is within the application layer. But any one of these layers is where data can fit and data can reside, and there's different places that you may want to do it in different areas within the platform. So the next slide really talks about the top 6 workloads. So when customers originally ask, where do I start? Or what should I really start thinking about when I think about the cloud? So I like to kind of take them through these really 6 scenarios, and we'll go into further detail on some of these, but start thinking through the areas that I can start reducing my infrastructure costs. Dev and test is probably the number one key area that customers ask about. I need to have that sandbox. How many times do the developers within your organization or marketing say, I need to have, I need to provision some VMs, or I need to provision somewhere within the hardware so that I can go ahead and have my own environment and start working to developing new software for the organization? Why not, instead of having to provision that and taking weeks or months to either get new hardware, get it installed, go through the whole purchasing process of getting all that, why not just run that in Azure? Because again, you're only paying for it by the minute. So those virtual machines running by the minute, you're paying for them by the minute. And then once that environment's done, rather than you having procured that hardware that now is sitting idle, that is now spun up in Azure instead. As organizations today start looking at the second scenario of SharePoint, many of you might still be running SharePoint 2007 or 2010. You're now looking at upgrading that. If you're not looking at necessarily going to Office 365 with SharePoint Online, absolutely looking at SharePoint in Azure. You could look at SharePoint in Azure in 2 different ways. One, you could run full SharePoint in Azure, or just use it from a DR perspective. The next thing is SQL and BI. When we talk about big data and BI, how do I want to run that within my organization? That can get expensive. That hardware is going to be expensive. Why not actually have the ability to run that up in Azure, fully support SQL, all the functionality with it, run that in Azure, and have the ability that my users gain access to that, or my outside vendors and customers to gain access to that through SQL and through Azure. The bottom left is obviously the application migration. Again, that's really where you're going to see a lot of efficiencies, and start looking at, migrating applications that you have, or looking at new applications that your organization is put on the docket for next year. The middle is storage, and I'll go into some detail quite a bit about storage. So Microsoft bought a company last year. It's been a year now, November of last year, called Store Simple. And it's a great way to start thinking about storage. And whether you use Store Simple or just use some of the native features within Windows Server or SQL, storage is very inexpensive within Azure and within the cloud. And then the last workload that many organizations are looking at today is if I'm running Office 365, I already have a tenant in Azure. When you are set up in Office 365, you get a tenant in Azure. So why don't I start looking at running Active Directory, whether it's on-premise or completely in Windows Azure? I can go ahead and run that and have single sign-on then. And I can have access to outside other vendors, whether it's Salesforce or Google. I have all that integration already built into that. This is a great way. When I looked at last year when Hurricane Sandy hit, that organizations were running, those organizations were wiped out that had maybe a primary site and secondary site. Rather than having that running in Windows Azure, those that actually had Active Directory running in Windows Azure could keep going, and their employees could get access to all the data. Those that were doing it on-premise and thought they had a backup and a secondary colo, that colo was wiped out as well. So that DR that they had built in wasn't quite as good as it needed to be for those organizations that actually had Active Directory running in Azure. Great way of continuing on that and great way of having that backup set. So when we start talking a little bit about the infrastructure side, there's a really couple key scenarios to really look through. And like I said, we talked a little bit about the workloads, and I'm going to dive into a couple of those topics. So the first one is storage. That's really the number one area where most customers have said, okay, I can really see some significant savings when I start looking at storage. So today, if you look at any of the IDE studies, they're saying that storage is growing in a typical organization 50 to 60% annually, but only a small percentage of that storage is actually accessed. And today, probably the number one or number two line item, probably in everyone's budget, is storage. And so we know that SAN and that NAS is going to be very expensive to procure. And it's always tough to have to replace all that and have to have that outlay for that capital expense. Forrester actually did a study where they stated that if they looked at a gigabyte of storage, it costs typically $95 per year on a typical SAN today. That's 4 times what it costs when you're looking at cloud storage. So storage is a great way to start thinking through how can I take some of that cost out of my organization and looking at storage within the cloud to do some of that and to reduce that overhead that I have, and going from capital expense actually to operational expense. Now, when we talk about storage in Azure, we're talking about 2 different types of storage. So we're talking about blob storage, we're talking about table storage. So storage is really the underpinning to everything that's in Azure. So blob storage is really for storing large amounts of unstructured data that can be accessed from anywhere in the world via HTTP or HTTPS. A single blob can be hundreds of gigabytes in size, and a single storage account can contain up to 100 terabytes of blobs. Again, this is great for storing images, documents directly to a browser, storing files for distributed access, streaming video and audio, using it for any backup and disaster recovery. All of that is really great for blob storage. The other way we look at it is table storage. That's really a NoSQL database, which is ideal then for storing structured non-relational data. So again, when we talk about storage, once you upload your data to a data center, so again, we have 4 data centers here in the U.S., so if I say that you're uploading your data to the West Coast data center, we're going to take that and actually make 2 more copies of your data. We do not charge for any ingress charges, so there's no charge to get your data into Azure. We do not charge for ingress charge. What we will charge is a charge to have your data there on a monthly basis. So we will also make 2 more copies of that data within that one data center across 2 file domains. We have 3 copies of your data locally. And then we will also make 3 copies of that data in another data center. So if we put that in the West Coast data center, we would make a copy of 3 more copies of that data in our East Coast data center. So then it's geo-replicated across those data centers. We do the same thing with our North data center and our South data center. So in theory, when you're looking at putting your backup or your data or whatever you're looking at doing in blob storage, you actually have 6 copies of your data backed up within Azure. talked a little bit about, a year ago, we bought a company called StoreSimple. So StoreSimple is actually an appliance. It is an appliance that will sit in your data center, which is kind of a conduit for data getting into Azure. Now, it's great for using it when we're looking at old archive data that you may have. So file shares, unstructured data that you may have sitting within a SAN that you actually may have backed up to, you may have it taken off premise to Iron Mountain, things like that. Again, looking at ways to kind of streamline some of those costs. We do have the StoreSimple appliance, so it's an iSCSI appliance. It does all the deduplication and encryption, 256K encryption. You own the keys. Microsoft does not have access to the keys. So you own all that data. That data then can be backed up onto the StoreSimple appliance, and then you create the timing to move it up into the Azure cloud. So as you want to pull that data out after a 90-day retention policy, you can go ahead and archive that data back up into Azure. You can recover this from any internet connection. So whether you're, you don't have to have a VPN, you don't have to be internal within the organization, you can recover this from any internet connection. And we have organizations that have saved anywhere from 60 to 80% from what they're paying now from storage costs from their typical SAN today. I just thought I would give a quick analysis of why we say the 60 to 80%. So on the left-hand side is just traditional storage. So your traditional servers, your primary volumes, your disk arrays that you have, your backup software, maybe an encryption appliance, then to a physical tape, and then maybe to offsite storage. So what StoreSimple does is it really takes that and takes your servers, takes that primary volume, takes a local snapshot on the device itself, and then actually transports that data into Azure. And again, we have 6 copies of that data running in Azure. So when you really think about it, is we're taking away majority of what you're doing on the left-hand side and putting that into a very small 2-node or 4-node appliance, which sits within your data center. So traditionally, 3 years of probably that capital expense that you have is about $1.3 million. When you're looking at it now, the capital expense is no longer there because we actually will give you that appliance for free. And then you're just looking at an operational expense of the Azure storage bundle within that for the Azure storage costs on an annual basis. So this is 100 terabytes of data. Again, the 100 terabytes is deduped and encrypted data. StoreSimple usually does about 2.5 times the deduplication rate, is what most customers see as well. So this is a great way to start taking off that old archive data that you may have sitting in your data center on some expensive hardware, or that you're transporting over to an Iron Mountain or an offsite storage. It's no longer needed, and you can easily recover any of that data. You don't have to wait to get those tapes back from Iron Mountain. Another way to really look at natively using Azure Blob Storage is to look at SQL Server. So SQL Server today, you can, with SQL Server 2012 and 2014, when it was released next year, you can take a look at those on-premise SQL Server images. They can be backed up asynchronously to Windows Azure storage. So, and in the case of, when you think about it that way, you're actually utilizing that. Today, storage is 9.5 cents a gigabyte a month. That is retail pricing. If you go ahead and take those images today, and you can asynchronously put them into the Azure cloud, and then say that there is, for some reason, a disaster within the organization, and that left-hand side goes down from your on-premise. You can then restore that with just set up a virtual machine in front of that blob storage, and connect it to that SQL Server, and you guys are up and running again. So you're really quickly restoring that image and reducing that end-user downtime. So as you guys are looking through your DR scenarios in the future, especially around SQL, this is a great way to start looking at pulling off some of those costs by just using natively Windows Azure storage. And then the other way of looking at it is, again, taking a look at just regular Windows Server or even System Center with DPM. So you can look at Windows Azure Backup. So again, taking the Windows Server, the agents the online agent that's just downloaded with Windows Server, and instead of doing that to a local disk, you actually will communicate to Azure Storage and provide that up into Azure Storage and into Blob Storage. System Center 2012 DPM, which is Data Protection Manager, SP1, also has direct hooks into Azure. So now you could look at seamlessly utilizing DPM, which maybe many of you use today for backup, and you can now put those backups directly into Azure Storage. So using the same tools that you're using today, but now we can find a much less expensive way when we look at storage. So storage can take on a lot of different conversations when we look at it, because not every customer does storage the same way. So we can look at it natively using some of the tools that you have, or we can look at appliances like a Store Simple, or Microsoft has a lot of partners today. If any of you are running eVault, using Commvault for backup, Veeam or Stealth Software, all of those organizations today have hooks into Azure. So rather than running that into expensive tapes or other offsite storage, all of these software packages have direct hooks into Azure. So whether you're using Microsoft tools or you're using third-party tools, more and more organizations are saying, more and more partners are coming to us saying, we want to be able to store that data rather than do it into expensive tapes or on-premise storage and move that all into the Azure cloud. So we talked about storage. The next thing is to take a look at how do we look at developing those applications, and how should we take a look at creating that sandbox for you. So I just wanted to run through a couple of scenarios of what organizations are doing today, and then how they're also looking at running this in Azure. So we talked a little bit about dev and test. So how many times have you probably had those developers come to you and ask you to provision some VMs for them and to have it spun up and running, and they need it tomorrow? Well, you don't have any room within your data center, so you have to go through the whole procurement process of buying new hardware. That usually the developers aren't happy about it, and now all of a sudden IT becomes the bottleneck. So rather than having to do that all within your own data center and having your IT organization have to provision all of those virtual machines and then manage them, the nicer way of looking at doing it is allow your developers to provision those virtual machines within Windows Azure, and then from the IT perspective, you're just managing them. Again, you're managing them through System Center, hopefully the same tools that you're using today to manage your on-premise environment. And again, those developers, you're paying for what you're using. So if they have the virtual machine spun up for 10 minutes, they're paying for 10 minutes. If they have it spun up for 8 hours, you're paying for 8 hours. You can also run some PowerShell scripts in there to shut those machines down at night in case the developers forget to do that. I have a lot of organizations that do that, so they shut those machines off at night, so they are not running and they are not charged for that compute charge. Now, the great thing about it is you can bring your own virtual machine images as VHDs, or you could use the gallery of images that we have already created in Windows Azure. So it has Windows Server in there, has SQL Server, Linux in there, there's Oracle in there. All of those images are already available. So if you need to spin up a virtual machine, you can do that instantly. And if your developers, if you don't want to provide the VHD for those developers specifically, they can just use the gallery and spin those up within minutes. So when we really think about it, it's really low cost and efficiencies, and then you don't have to touch anything within your production environment. This environment can be completely separate, and you're able then to potentially build back from an IT organization. You can now build back because you know exactly what those developers are running in Azure, and you can build that back and take some of that cost that you usually have to have in your budget, and you can reduce some of those costs as well. I wanted to just kind of give you guys an example. This is the one question that always comes up. Well, what does this really cost? What do I need to look at? This is a fairly large, beefier terms of environment in terms of customer needed a lot of virtual machines, larger virtual machines running. So this is an example of what $50,000 would buy you on an annual basis to run within a dev and test environment. So there's 22 virtual machines running 300 hours, which is a little less than half time, and running that within that. So you have 2 terabytes of storage, and then 1 terabyte of bandwidth of egress coming out of there. So kind of gives you an example of an environment. Some organizations say I just need small. For that $50,000, you could run 100 small virtual machines up in Azure. Just really will depend, but it kind of gives you an example of here's what some of the costs would be. The next scenario just talks about extending your network, and this is really how Azure is set up. So your organization then would create a virtual network or a VNet, which allows you to create a logically isolated section of Azure and kind of treat it like your own network. So you can customize that network configuration for that VNet. You can create subnets, assign private IP addresses, and then bring your own DNS server if you wish. So today, everything is done through virtual VPN. We have announced an offering with AT&T today. We have it in private preview today for extension with their MPLS network. They are a global provider today. We hope to have that in fully GA'd within early calendar 2014, and then we will be adding on other VPN or other MPLS providers like a Level 3, Time Warner, you name it, Verizon. Those are all coming on board. So if the organization, most organizations are very happy with a VPN. If you want to be able to use an MPLS network and then just hook this onto your MPLS network, that is coming. That will GA in early calendar 2014. And when we talk through a little bit about extending your network, we talked a little bit about Office 365 and then really creating that integration between Active Directory and using, whether you want to use DirSync, whether you want to have a full domain controller within that, you're just creating an extension of your own network. So now the Azure Cloud is truly an extension of your network. And I just thought it would be great to kind of just see, this is what a lot of organizations look at doing, of having on-premise. They may have a couple of their domain controllers, but they also may now decide, okay, I need to put a couple of domain controllers up in Azure. I need to have that standby server. I need to have the proxy server. Just an idea of some of the thoughts around the cost to do that. Very inexpensive now to have this as a DR, knowing that you can always get access to Active Directory in Azure whenever you need it and have that certification happen within Azure and not have to worry about having it on-premise or a colo in case something does happen from a disaster. Working with customers in Indiana 2 weeks ago when we had the tornadoes that came through. Absolutely one of the things, they do not have a true DR for Active Directory, and this is one of the things we are moving forward with them as well. So how do we ensure that now we have that built-in DR for them? And then we talked a little bit earlier about SharePoint. So when you're extending your network, there's two ways of integrating SharePoint. You can then use it from your existing data center, you're creating that virtual network, and you can run full SharePoint. So you're going to have the SharePoint server, your Active Directory server, you can have some SQL servers all running in Azure, and you can have access from your internal users or have access from your users over the internet. So the key difference between like Office 365 SharePoint and SharePoint in Azure is SharePoint in Azure has functionality. So if you need to do a lot of customization of SharePoint, that is, Office 365 is not a great fit for you. So we have organizations now have said, okay, I'm going to do that in Azure instead. You can also have a combination of both if you need to. So other organizations have also said, you know what, this is a great way for me to kind of do dev and test. I have SharePoint 2007, I have SharePoint 2010. I need to kind of test this out on my global organization, so I'm going to use it from a dev and test environment. This is a great scenario to do this. I have a customer who they're running SharePoint 2007, and they're running SQL 2008, and they actually were trying to do BI. Well, obviously we can't do BI with those two products. So instead, what they've done is they have put within Windows Azure, they have done SQL 2012, and they have done SharePoint 2013, and they have spun it up to now do BI for a particular business unit. And now that business unit has a solution in under 2 weeks, when prior to that, IT was trying to figure out how do I now upgrade this whole environment that I have out here so that I can get that BI functionality for one business unit. So the return of being able to, from your organization, really seeing that return to that business unit is really where we want to go. And then this kind of gives you just a good pricing example of what SharePoint looks like in Azure. Again, this is pretty typical for organizations. You need a couple of larger VMs to run SharePoint. You have a couple web front ends, you have a couple application servers, and then you probably have a SQL server. Just depending upon your organization, this is just a typical organization that I work with around what they're doing. So very inexpensive to kind of look at running either a dev and test environment or running full SharePoint within Azure. And then the last area that we wanted to look at is really look at, how do I extend and reach where my data center doesn't reach today? How do I extend out beyond where I am? I don't have the ability to run these websites globally. I'm seeing latency. I'm seeing complaints. I'm not getting that resiliency that I need out of that website. So really start looking at how do I take advantage of Microsoft's cloud and our website and our ability to host those websites on a global basis. And we have a feature that came out called Traffic Manager, which allows you to load balance between data centers as well. So great way of looking at especially retail organizations during the holidays as they start spinning up more campaigns. Absolutely, those websites, they're just seeing a lot more traffic. So how do how do I extend that out so that I don't have to build that infrastructure? Another service is called multi-factor authentication. If you do any type of two-factor authentication today or use any sort of tokens, Microsoft bought a company last August called Phone Factor, if anyone's familiar with that. This is now a full-blown service that we rebranded as multi-factor authentication. It's great to use, so really it gives you a secure way of running that second-factor authentication within the Azure cloud. So it's really taking a look at something you know, which is going to be your password or a PIN, something you have, most likely it's your phone. Most likely you get a text or a phone call to your phone. You either have to go and enter that code, you have to, respond back, and that gives you that secondary multi-factor authentication, or something you are, like a fingerprint, retinal scan, things like that. Multi-factor authentication is very inexpensive, very easy to configure, and any type of financial organizations, utility organizations, things like that, that's something that we've seen a lot of interest in and seen a lot of companies adopt quickly. And the other thing is, mobile services. I talked a lot about the mobile applications that you can do. So Azure really start thinking about extending that service out to mobile devices. Maybe I want to send messaging out to mobile devices. I want to do text messaging. I want to try and do promotional sales. All of that, those turnkey solutions can all be run actually in Windows Azure. And then again, we have great integration with a lot of our partners. A lot of our partners today are hosting their solutions within Azure and walking through that of how do I now continue to integrate with what the partners and sources have and where they're going today. I think, Don, that will be it for me. I just have a couple of case studies that are out here. It's a little bit of an older list, but customers today that are running Azure, and a couple of quotes on the windowsazure.com website. There's also full-blown case studies if anyone wants to look up any of the case studies, but great resources to kind of talk through what customers are doing with Azure and how they've got started and how they move forward with Azure.
Great. Thanks, Joni. Great job.
I will send it back to you, Don.
All right. Okay, great. So Joni did a great job of kind of going through all the different pieces of Azure and some of the different possibilities and those pieces. Again, what we wanted to do very quickly is also give you a customer example. Again, want to be respectful to everyone's time as well. So this is an organization that we are continuing to work with today, as you'll see in one of the next slides. We've helped them develop a roadmap for how to take on a lot of these different workloads. So, when I first started learning about this and heard Joni talk about this as well several years ago, it was very overwhelming at first, right? All the different possibilities, all the different services, all the different solutions that Microsoft is providing to the customers, and then add on top of that the competitive pieces, right, of other cloud platforms that are out there, and then add on top of that other partners who have, dedicated solutions and those type of things, co-location facilities and those pieces. It becomes very confusing for folks that are trying to build a strategy and build momentum and really be a service to the business, as we talked about earlier, some of the requirements and things that we're hearing from the customers. So this particular example of a customer is a very high-profile organization that focuses on sales, marketing, and distribution of boutique luxury hotels. So if you think through different places where maybe you've booked a particular hotel, this is basically a situation where a hotel has to meet a certain criteria to be acknowledged by this particular firm. So you can think through kind of their global footprint, the different locations that they would have. So a very large organization that runs a very specific business, very niche business as well, while they have competitors, lots of different pieces. They're very heavy on online website and services needs, very heavy on the data usage and storage usage, to Joni's point earlier around some of the storage components and those. They do a lot of the lab testing. So Joni had talked a little bit about development labs, staging labs, those type of pieces. So they do a lot of that for the different websites that they deliver and being able to reach out to their customers from a sales and marketing perspective. And then obviously, probably very similar to every customer that's on this call as well, is they required a seamless experience for their end users. So they were really looking at ways that they could push these different services out to their customers. So what Netrix did with them was actually develop a online services roadmap. So we worked with them both on the delivery of these solutions and technologies, but very important to us at the very beginning was to help map out a strategy with them around how to accomplish and take on some of these different workloads and those pieces. So at a very high level, what you can see here is this was not just focused at the Microsoft Windows Azure platform. Certainly components of that are in here, but this was really about an overall, what are we going to run on-prem? What are we going to run in co-location data centers if necessary? And what can we run in the public cloud and take advantage of the ROI model that's available for a lot of these types of services, and Joni talked about a lot of those already. So when we look through here, different areas that the customer was able to see very quick ROI on was things like their Exchange environment. So if you're not already an Office 365 customer, those are an opportunity for things like that, right? Where those types of things. So you kind of see where some of those pieces are. So have lots of options around what some of those pieces may be for that. In addition, you see opportunities for things like SharePoint Online that Joni had talked about, but also there may be different components where you use SharePoint Online for maybe some departmental pieces, for sharing documents, collaboration between those folks, but then there might be a need for deploying SharePoint as a business-to-business type application. So there's opportunities for using Azure for that and have that host a lot of that infrastructure that we talked about to be able to support that. So as we kind of roll through these different pieces on the roadmap, you see different places. We talked about Active Directory. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot of customers do is extend Active Directory into this platform, both for the DR solution that Joni talked about, but also as a kind of an IT in a box, if you will, for their branch location. So I know one of the challenges I had when I was a director of IT was really trying to understand how to secure and provide services at the branch locations. Oftentimes some of the places that I've been in, their servers for that particular location is in a closet that's often overheating, doesn't have enough power, some of those type of things. And while we tried to centralize a lot of those services, sometimes we still wanted the ability to have some ability for that branch office to have some of their own services for lots of different reasons. So we're seeing a lot of customers take the opportunity to leverage some of these cloud services even for their branch locations. So we've developed some offerings around that as well. And then as we continue to move down the stack, obviously one of the things that Joni spent a lot of time on was talking about storage. That's something very early on that customers are taking advantage of. A lot of customers we're talking to about that today. The cost per gigabyte, if you will, or terabyte, really is something we've not seen before. I mean, this is an opportunity for customers to really leverage this and then be able to use those dollars very smartly in other ways for innovation for their business, marketing, sales, those types of things. So this is something that we're encouraging customers to take a look at very quickly. And as I show here on the roadmap, it's a very high ROI factor that we're seeing for customers around that. So the reason why we're seeing a lot of customers take advantage of that very quickly. And then lastly, Joni had used a good example as well. This particular customer, the holidays, they do definitely see an increase in need for scalability for their websites, but they also see this a lot in the January, February timeframe for people booking spring breaks, right, and those types of things for hotel bookings, family vacations that will take place during the summer months, and those type of things. So again, another great example of how to use this platform and some of the solutions that are provided in the different workloads to allow scalability and those type of things. How can Netrix help with this? And again, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to kind of run through this very quickly. Obviously, we're able to help out with all the delivery and road mapping and strategy sessions related to this. If you're looking to look at things like Office 365, where all of that is as a service, and essentially out in the cloud for those pieces and a hybrid deployment of that. There's different programs that Netrix is participating in based upon the the deployments that we've done, the particular certifications that we hold, where we're lucky to be one of those partners that are looked at very highly from Microsoft to be able to provide these type of services. So if you have questions on that, please reach out either to myself or Pam, and we can provide you additional information on those moving forward. So very quickly before I open it up for Q&A, Pam did want me to let everyone know that if you're for your gift card for lunch, is thanking you for being a guest on the webinar today. If you could reply back to the email that Pam sent to you earlier today, and let her know what email address you would like that gift card to be sent to, and she will take care of that for everyone. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then